had been searching for an affordable apartment for weeks when I stumbled upon this one, a small but decent place in an old building at the edge of the city. The rent was suspiciously low, but the landlord assured me it was simply because of the building's age. "It's not fancy, but it's quiet," he had said with a forced smile. I didn't ask too many questions. I just needed a place to stay. Moving in was uneventful. The place smelled like dust and something faintly metallic, but I assumed it was just because it hadn't been occupied for a while. The walls were an off-white color, with faint stains near the ceiling that looked like water damage. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the single window in the living room overlooked a narrow alley where barely any light reached. It wasn't ideal, but it was mine. The first night, as I was unpacking, I heard something from the apartment above, a steady rhythmic scraping sound, like furniture being dragged. It went on for a few minutes, then stopped suddenly. I listened for a while, expecting to hear footsteps or voices, but there was nothing, just silence. I shrugged it off. Old buildings make noises, I told myself. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again, the same slow, deliberate scraping from above. I checked the time, 2:17 a.m. Who moves furniture at this hour? I decided to ignore it and went to bed. But just as I was drifting off, another sound jolted me awake, this time from inside my apartment. A faint rustling, like paper being crumpled. My heart pounded. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound was coming from the corner of my bedroom, near the closet. I turned on my bedside lamp and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. I got up and hesitantly opened the closet door. It was empty except for my suitcase. No sign of anything that could have made the noise. But as I stood there, I felt something odd, an unnatural stillness in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. Shaking it off, I went back to bed and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I asked the landlord about the tenant upstairs. "Oh," he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "That apartment's empty right now." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "But I heard noises, furniture moving, twice last night." His expression darkened. "Must be the pipes," he said quickly. "This building's old, makes all kinds of noises." Then, before I could ask anything else, he muttered something about needing to check on another unit and walked away. That night the noises returned. The scraping sound from above, the faint rustling in my room, but this time something else happened. As I was brushing my teeth, I noticed the bathroom mirror looked odd. The surface was fogging up even though I wasn't using hot water. Then, right in front of me, a word began to appear on the glass, as if written by an invisible finger. "Leave." I froze, the toothbrush slipping from my hand. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, unblinking. My chest tightened. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But I was alone. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I told myself I had imagined the writing on the mirror. Maybe it was just some leftover residue from a previous tenant. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Either way, I convinced myself there was a logical explanation. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I double-checked the locks before bed. The front door, the windows, everything was secure. Still, a strange unease settled in my chest, making it impossible to relax. As I lay in bed, the silence in the apartment felt unnatural, too thick. as if the walls were pressing in around me. Then, just past midnight, the noise started again. The slow, dragging sound from the empty apartment above. But this time, it wasn't just that. There was something else. A faint creaking, like footsteps, but not from the ceiling. These were closer. They were coming from the hallway outside my apartment. I sat up, my heart hammering. I strained my ears listening. The sound was slow, deliberate. A single step, then a pause. Another step. It was moving toward my door. Holding my breath, I slipped out of bed and crept to the peephole. My fingers trembled as I leaned forward to look outside. At first I saw nothing. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb near the stairwell. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw movement. A shadow. It was just standing there, in the middle of the hallway, motionless. It wasn't a person. I could tell that immediately. It was too still, too featureless. Just a dark, human-shaped silhouette that seemed to waver slightly, like smoke trapped in the air. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but as I watched, the shadow shifted. It turned slowly, until I could feel it, looking directly at my door. Holding my breath, I slipped out of bed and crept to the peephole. My fingers trembled as I leaned forward to look outside. At first I saw nothing. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb near the stairwell. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw movement. A shadow. It was just standing there, in the middle of the hallway, motionless. It wasn't a person. I could tell that immediately. It was too still, too featureless. Just a dark, human-shaped silhouette that seemed to waver slightly, like smoke trapped in the air. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but as I watched, the shadow shifted. It turned slowly, until I could feel it looking directly at my door. I stepped back, heart racing, barely able to breathe. Then, a knock, soft at first, barely more than a tap, then louder. I stumbled backward, my pulse thundering in my ears. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, unable to move. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I forced myself to look through the peephole again. The shadow was gone. I barely slept that night, every noise sending me into a panic. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I went straight to my landlord's office, demanding to know what was going on. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept either. "Did you see something?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "There was something in the hallway." His expression tightened. "A shadow?" A chill ran down my spine. "You've seen it too." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sighed, rubbing his temples. "It happens sometimes," he muttered. "Mostly at night. That's why this apartment stays empty so often." I felt my stomach drop. "And you still rented it out?" He gave me a tired look. People don't believe it until they see it. I wanted to leave. I should have packed my bags and walked out right then. But I hesitated. A part of me wanted to understand. That night I stayed up, waiting, watching. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the knocking started again. But this time, the door handle turned. I held my breath as the door handle twisted, the metal creaking softly in the silence of my apartment. My pulse pounded so loudly, I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. But the door didn't open. It just rattled, like someone was testing it, making sure it was locked. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stood frozen for what felt like hours before I finally found the courage to move. With shaking hands, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a lamp, and approached the door. Slowly, I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Nothing. I exhaled shakily and dared to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my bed with every light on, waiting for morning. As soon as it was bright enough outside, I made up my mind. I needed to find out what was happening in this building. I started with the neighbors. The first few doors I knocked on went unanswered, but finally, an elderly woman on the third floor cracked her door open just enough to look at me. She had wary eyes, as if she already knew why I was there. "You're in 2B, aren't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Did you hear anything last night?" "The knocking?" Her grip on the door tightened. "I don't open my door at night. And you shouldn't either." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I swallowed. "Do you know what's going on? Has something happened in that apartment before?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's not just your apartment, dear. It's this whole building. People come and go quickly. The ones who stay either don't notice or they pretend not to." I frowned. "But what is it? What's causing this?" She shook her head. "No one really knows, but years ago, there was a man. He lived in 2B. A chill ran down my spine." "What happened to him?" Her gaze flickered toward the hallway, as if checking for something. Then she whispered, "He disappeared. Just gone. One night, the neighbors heard strange noises. A struggle. Someone was crying, whispering, begging. Then silence. When the landlord checked the next day, the apartment was locked from the inside. But he wasn't there." I swallowed hard. "And no one found him?" She shook her head. "No body, no trace. Just his shadow. People say they still see it, standing in the hallway at night, watching." A cold shiver crawled up my back. I had seen it. Before I could ask more, she stepped back and started to close the door. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "If you hear it again, if you see it, don't open the door, no matter what." The door shut, leaving me standing there, heart pounding. I spent the rest of the day researching, trying to find any mention of a missing man from this building. But there was nothing. No news articles, no police reports. It was like he had never existed. That night I sat in my apartment, every nerve on edge, waiting. And then, at 2:17 a.m., the knocking returned. Only this time, it wasn't just at my door. It was at my window, too. The knocking came from both the door and the window, slow and deliberate. A rhythmic pattern, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted me to know it was there. My breath hitched. I was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, just a sheer drop to the alley below. There was no way anyone could be knocking on my window. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in me screamed to stay where I was, to squeeze my eyes shut and wait for it to stop. But some terrible force compelled me forward. Step by step, I moved toward the window, my hands ice cold, my heart hammering in my chest. I reached out, hesitated, then pulled back the curtain in one swift motion. Nothing. The alley below was empty. The glass was undisturbed, but just as relief started to sink in, I saw it. A faint outline in the reflection of the window. A shadow standing right behind me. I spun around, my stomach twisting into a knot. The room was empty, but the air was heavy, charged with something unseen. The temperature had dropped. I could see my breath misting in the dim light. And then the knocking at the door started again. I backed away, gripping my phone with trembling hands. I should have called someone. anyone. But what would I even say? That there was a ghost in my apartment? That the shadows had come to life? Who would believe me? The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then slowly, the handle began to turn. I scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My eyes locked on the door as it creaked open an inch. Nothing was there. Just darkness spilling into the room like ink. Then the lights flickered. A gust of air rushed past me, though the window and door were both shut. I felt something move. Felt it, though I couldn't see it. It was close. It was inside. My chest tightened as an overwhelming pressure settled over me, like invisible hands pressing down on my shoulders, my throat, my ribs. I gasped, struggling to breathe, my vision blurring at the edges. The walls groaned, the floor creaked, and then a whisper right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." The words weren't spoken aloud. They were inside my head, crawling through my thoughts like insects. I bolted. I didn't grab my keys, didn't take my phone. I just ran. Out the door, down the hallway, stumbling down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic. The lobby was dark, eerily silent. I burst through the front doors into the cold night air, gasping like I had just surfaced from drowning. The street outside was deserted, the world oblivious to the terror I had just faced. I stood there, panting, my mind reeling. I needed to leave, needed to get far away from that place. But then, a terrible realization hit me. My keys, my wallet, my phone, they were still inside. And to get them back, I would have to go in again.